I mean, God bless him for understanding the offensive line needed help, and you can't
Yes.
go in with whatever 4 guys taken in the last 100 picks. But, and I you got to remember also they're signing guys on the eve of training camp. They're not signing guys on the first day of free agency. So these are picks that will help, players that'll help you. But this is not the ideal situation to build an offensive line.
No question. And anyone who's underwhelmed with Ryan Poles' production at this point has justifiable reasons to be that way, right? You had a big splash signing in March of Larry Ogunjobi that fell through where the physical didn't turn out the way you thought it would. You had 3 arrests in a span of 11 weeks over the offseason that leaves a little bit of a blemish on your mark. And now you're obviously trying to put together a group that is – listen, I think we should all agree here – as we're in the first week of training camp, that this group's goal in 2022 isn't to win a championship. It's to become functional and competitive in a way where meaningful progress can be made. And specifically, as you're talking about the offensive line, where meaningful progress can be made in the development of Justin Fields and that tie-in and trying to make him a quarterback who you believe can be your quarterback in 2026, right? You want to have that feeling when you get to week 18 this year that Justin is 100% the guy that you're going to be building around. And so to do that, you've got to put support around him. And even though these guys are street free agents, if you can get a few more winks of sleep at night because Riley Reif is playing left tackle rather than Braxton Jones, then so be it, right? And that's just kind of the stair-step climb they've got to take to, again, become functional and competitive in a league that's going to demand a lot of them.
All right, Dan, I know this is jumping to conclusions, but we haven't seen much, and it's a small sample size for both guys. But I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I think that so far I have felt myself feeling more confident in the job that Matt Eberflus might do as a head coach than I do maybe Ryan Poles as a general manager. And certainly there have been more at-bats perhaps for Ryan Poles to swing and miss or foul one off than there have been for Matt Eberflus. Because all he's done is basically run mini camps and OTAs, and this is his first training camp. But I wonder where you stand on your first initial impressions comparing both guys in terms of their new roles.
So I'm firmly stuck in the wait-and-see chair right now on Matt Eberflus. I'm still trying to get a feel for how this guy is going to resonate with an entire football team through the course of what starts this week and becomes a 5.5-month slog, right? Like, it's very easy to establish standards. It's very easy to create juice out of the gates. Now you've got to retain those standards and retain that juice through January. Even if you're 4-10, right, headed for Christmas, you've got to find a way to get your team up and running. And so those tests for Matt Eberflus are going to come much later than they've come for Ryan Poles, as you acknowledged. The one thing I think Matt has done really, really well at since he got here and since he took over the players, right, in April when the off-season program started is be very clear about what he's expecting out of them. Be very clear about the standard that's being set. Be very clear about how practice should look and how it's going to be graded afterwards. And I think it is crystal clear to those guys what's expected out of them. Now they've got to match that, right? And now they've got to decide, when, again, as we've talked about, if the results are as we expect them to be, you may not be as into practicing hard in November when you're a last-place team that's going nowhere as you are in training camp when you're fighting for a role, right? And so that's the challenge that Matt's going to have to navigate here in the months ahead is just being able to keep this team bought in, being able to keep this team understanding what he wants, and turning that into results. If he can do that, maybe we get to December and January and say, Matt Eberflus has got this thing pointed in the right direction. Right now I'm in the wait-and-see camp.
Yeah, and, he's a 52-year-old first-time head coach, and he's a guy that has a lot of ideas that are very football-y ideas, right? The hits principle and M&M, and, God bless him. I'm not saying it can't work. I do think it could work initially because you got a lot of young players that are eager to impress and get to be a part of it, and that makes it's not – when they get more talent on the roster, when Ryan Poles kicks in, and again, it's hard to see what he's doing because he hasn't had a first-round draft pick, and we haven't seen how he would manipulate the draft or whatever because he hasn't had the opportunity. But when you get better players in, that's when the coaching becomes maybe more difficult because right now you don't have a lot of personalities that are pushing back. There's a couple, obviously, and that's what we're talking about. But for the most part, you got a lot of young guys that are eager to please their coach and want to stick around in the league.
Yeah, well, and as an extension of that, Mully, I asked Matt yesterday how he is going to come up with an approach and a formula to this camp, to running, 6.5 weeks of high intensity, high hustle practices in a way where, one, you don't run into soft tissue injury hell, right? We've seen that happen before. I think in Lovey's first camp, there was that rash of hamstring pulls and quad tears and whatever else that came with it. You got to avoid that. And then you've also got to just have an ability to read the emotional state of your team and understand what days you need to hit the brakes a little bit and give them that little refresh button so that you get results out of that, right? And he said very clearly, look, you can't be a hard football team and practice soft. And so his foot is going to be firmly pressed on that gas pedal for the foreseeable future. And then it's going to be a test for him to figure out when it is time to ease up on the gas, when it's time to move that foot over to the brake and hit it a little bit. And that's a challenge for a first-time coach who's never done this, who hasn't had high-level success as a coordinator in other places. You got to figure out how to wear that hat and juggle that role. The other part of this, as you mentioned, is trying to figure out where your stars are, right? And this is going to be a difficult watch, I think, for a lot of people in Chicago, in understanding that this team is void of stars, and it's not just personalities. Personalities comes with production, right? The guys develop production once they've become, or personalities once they become productive in this league. And so when you don't have that, you got to find those guys who then can not only produce for you, but be those tone-setting leaders for you. And that's a major work in progress for this team right now.
So, Dan, I like the way that you have described Justin Fields and what is in front of him and what this training camp represents. Command and ownership, I think, are the two words that you have used on the air and in print to describe what you're looking for this season and maybe this month. How much respect do you think that he does command from the locker room, and how much is he in prove-it mode, as much as he is to maybe to us and maybe to the fan base, and certainly some things that based on last year's unevenness. But in that locker room with his peers, do you think that there is respect? Do you think that it's going to be difficult for him to be that leader that he needs to be?
I don't think it's going to be difficult. I think Justin is wired that way naturally. I think in his DNA, he's got that drive to him. I think he's got that drive to be great. I think he's got the understanding of what you need to invest to reach those levels, particularly at this level, and how much different that is than just trying to be a standout quarterback in college. And so he understands what he's facing. I think the respect level is always there in July. I think it's always there in the early parts of August. I think the respect level that needs to be there is when we get into October and November, and the results maybe in the win-loss column and in the offensive stats aren't what you want them to be. Can you still get the group around you to follow you every single day? I think we'd all agree that one of the biggest flaws in Jay Cutler was his inability to be a hub of energy, right? You heard that from teammates and coaches that came and went through Hallis Hall and weren't impressed with Jay's ability to be that guy that everyone else could plug into on a slow Wednesday to get their energy and really just set a tone and be charged up for the week. Justin's got to be that guy. He's in his first year as a full-time starter, right? He's in his first year with a new offense, and his first year with a lot of new coaches and new teammates. And he's got to figure out how to connect with a lot of different people while at the same time doing all the late-night homework that's required to absorb this playbook and play at a level that keeps that respect there, where it's not just, oh, boy, he really worked hard over the summer. Everybody works hard over the summer, right? That's a prerequisite for success. It's not a guarantee of it. And so Justin's got to figure out what it is for him and what that timeline is to juggle his time, right? The time management to be able to do all these things and check all these different boxes to play at a high level.
That's great. It's well said.